Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Facts and Fallacies, episode 246. My name is Cameron English. That's Liza Dunn, Dr. Liza, as we like to call her. It's nice to see everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Liza, how's it going? How are you this wonderful weekend it is?
It's great. I'm doing great. Yeah, running around, hanging out with family, getting ready for Christmas.
Yeah. We're setting up decorations. It's the time of the season. Got to slow down and enjoy it, though, because it goes by so quick. There's so much to do. So yeah, everyone just take a chill pill and enjoy the season if you can. Because
Exactly. It just seems like yesterday, we had Thanksgiving.
I know. I'm ready for another day of indulgence in too many mashed potatoes.
Me too. I never met a potato I didn't like.
yeah, that's the true blessing of the Christmas season. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's jump into our stories today. We've got three as always. So first up, autism increase mystery solved. No, it's not vaccines, GMOs, glyphosate, or organic food. Next up, psychedelics could help veterans with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Breakthroughs and dropping of taboos, opening new treatment possibilities. And finally, can alcoholism be inherited? Intriguing stuff as always. But let's jump into this first story, Liza. This is a piece originally published in 2016. This is by Arvind Suresh. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this to see how things have progressed, because the story is several years old now. I think it's still basically correct in that we've changed the definition of autism, and I guess more specifically, it's called autism spectrum disorder, and there's multiple conditions. Right. And ever since we've done that, and there's been I guess increased awareness and the broader diagnosis and improved access to healthcare and so forth. All of these things have sort of come together to expand the number of cases. And there's been this sort of ongoing debate, I guess you could say, between, I don't know, I guess you'd call it like mainstream medicine would say this is just expanded diagnosis. And then you have the Joe Mercolas of the world saying, well, it's glyphosate or it's
chemicals.
Right. I've heard, I don't know if Wi-Fi or cell phones or proximity to freeways or to telephone lines. Yeah. Could, any kind of weird correlation. And so, to be fair though, there has been a significant increase, and I wasn't aware actually of how big it is. So back in the 1970s, it was 1 out of every 2,000 children. So it was relatively rare. And then today, Suresh points out that it's 1 in 158-year-olds in one of the recent studies. So that's a significant increase. So I don't blame people for going, what's going on here? And I've even heard anecdotally people that work in this field say, if you talk to anyone who works with children with these conditions, there's just more of them now. There just seems to be more. So I understand, but we don't know exactly what it is. And so that's the point Suresh is making. He goes on to say, we can say pretty definitively, it's not genetically modified crops. It's not whatever pesticide. It's not any vaccine, because these things have all been pretty thoroughly studied. And there's just no there, so to speak. He does bring up an interesting point, and he's quoting here the British Medical Journal, so we can get into this in a little bit. But this is, I guess, a commentary from BMJ, and they're talking about, this specific question has more or less been settled. We know it's not these handful of causes or potential causes. But BMJ says the damage to public health has already been done, and it continues. And they say, and this is interesting, they say, as a longtime fan of the media, they say, fueled by unbalanced media reporting and ineffective response from government researchers, journals, and the medical profession, which is pretty interesting. And I think that's right on the nose in terms of, where blame needs to go. But nonetheless, jump in here. You're the physician. What's going on with this question as of 2023?
Yeah, I think that, a couple of things. So the whole definition of autism has evolved over time, right? So when I first started hearing about this debilitating disorder. I was in college. I had friends that was working in a home for autistic children, and these children were severely autistic, with violent tendencies, self-harm, things, banging their heads, significant developmental delay, and things like that. And then, so over the years, there started being more and more people identified as having sort of autistic features, meaning that they had a delay in speech, and then in speech milestones, and then also having odd kind of behaviors. But this group that they started including in this category actually had, were able to go to school and things like this. So it expanded to a more mild form, although they were impaired and had odd behaviors and things like that. They were intellectually able to do things. They weren't, institutionalized. And then it went from there into people who were just, who were able to actually achieve very well. They weren't just in, special schools, but they were able to achieve milestones. So a colleague of mine's son was diagnosed at age 2 and really couldn't look at people and had a real hard time interacting with people. But he is off and graduated from engineering school. So there's a whole spectrum of people that have been included in this category. And then there was the Asperger's kind of kid, and Asperger's has been taken out of the spectrum of diagnosis. And those kids were kids that they would often call little professors, that wouldn't pick up on social cues, and would, give formal lectures about whatever they were interested in at the time. And so, but there was not a clear clinical constellation of symptoms and signs that made people go, oh, this person is autistic. So that's where the spectrum disorder came in. So you're naturally going to get a higher prevalence of this disorder or this condition when you're putting more and more and more people in the category. And they were getting, they were requiring special ed, they were requiring extra help at school and things like that. And so once again, the whole range of people in the 70s, you might have thought that the children that were being categorized as Asperger's might have been just a little different, or they were just a different kind of kid. They were recognized as being able to function in school, but they just had a harder time with social situations. So I think that greatly expanded the number of people who were diagnosed with autism and autism spectrum disorder. So you had a whole bunch of kids being thrown into that same category. I do think, though, there are different significant differences now in birthing patterns, and people are having babies much later in life than they were. And I wonder, and there are genes that are associated with the diagnosis in kids who've got pretty significant autism. So I don't know if you know about Peter Hotez has a daughter that's who's got pretty significant autism, required special training and stuff like that, and it's not been able to. She's social and things like that, but she's got some delay, and so and has required significant extra help. And so I think that they have found genetic associations that show that prior to birth, that there's already an ongoing process in the brain that contributes to it. And he's got a book that he's written about it called, because his daughter Rachel. I'm trying to remember the title of the book. I'll have to look it up. But I think it's an interesting perspective, because he's obviously very involved in the vaccine debate, and no, vaccines did not cause Rachel's autism. And so he's trying to help dispel that myth that was propagated by Andrew Wakefield in the Lancet. So there are a couple of things. People are having babies later, and that may contribute to it. Mm-hmm. There are some genetic features to it. It's a spectrum disorder, so a lot more people are getting diagnosed than before. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we have a real clear understanding of the nuances of all of it. But it is not It's not caused by vaccines. It's not caused by organic food. It's not caused by Jenny McCarthy. It's not caused by any of that stuff. And it gets, and a lot of people, for different reasons, make claims like that. So there are people who are genuinely concerned about their kids, and kids start getting their vaccines at the same time that they start seeing these delays. So people make that association and get very worried about it. But there's no definitive evidence that that's the case.
Yeah, I think people tend to overlook how simple this can be, because it's been so politicized is the wrong word, but it's been so inflammatory as a discussion for the last 20 years at this point. But I looked at one study. This is from 2019, I want to say. But one of the points they made is that in the 1980s, if you had children that would have been diagnosed with a developmental language disorder, a physician would look at them today and go, "Oh, that child is autistic or is on the spectrum," right? It's just because the criteria have changed so much. But I think, that kind of a simple explanation, it's not totally satisfying, especially if you're a parent or if, this affects your life. But that seems to make sense to me. The fact that over time we just get better at identifying certain conditions and treating them ultimately, which is really good news. But it's not just, and one thing I want to stress, because I think there's also a tendency to, like, we shoehorn this discussion into autism just is a thing, and there's more people that are diagnosed with it, and it's not GMOs and vaccines. Have a nice day. And we sort of prepackage it, but there's been lots of studies, so it's not just like people are trying to defend these technologies. They've looked at maternal smoking, they've looked at vaccines, they've looked at pesticides, but then they've also looked at like IVF, because there was speculation for a while that was contributing to the uptick, So, I mean, those at least sound plausible to me. So, in other words, it sounds like what's happening is researchers are going through these and they're going, well, this might be possible, and they're just knocking them down one at a time until they settle on something that makes sense. And it doesn't sound like anything does. It's just some combination of genetics, and there's maybe some factor we haven't yet identified.
That's right. And some of the people that are being classified as autistic, also, I actually almost think that it might be a little bit selected for. And the reason why I think it might be a little bit selected for is because a lot of autistic kids are able to really, really focus on an idea. You hear the whole idea about savants, right? People who have this incredible memory, and they can or just an incredible skill that they're very, very good at. And I wonder, it makes you wonder about, the kind of people that were looking at the constellations and for a long enough time to be able to see a pattern, be able to pick it up, be able to, make scientific advances. People who are very social tend to be a little bit more ADHD kind of, right? And bounce from one thing to another. You can really, really focus on one scientific idea. I wonder if you're not a little bit less, you may be more introverted, or you may be a little less, social, but you've got this gift in a case. And I'm not trying to downplay some of the severe cases of autism, but some people have a gift that they make these incredible scientific discoveries. I mean, if you tried to make me discover calculus, that would be a disaster, right? So, but Newton, and just the scientific minds that had to think about things so deeply to be able to invent a whole field of science or a whole field of math. You wonder if that's their mind wasn't wired in a way. Well, their mind is wired in a way that's different than mine or yours, and everybody's got their own unique feature to bring to it. So I suspect that what is some of the people that are being called autistic now were key to advancing really important scientific principles.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I don't know. Well, I guess I shouldn't say I have no doubt that it seems quite likely to me that throughout history, like people that are just brilliant authors or scientists or musicians, there's just something slightly different, right? Right. If
that's right.
You can say neurodiverse or whatever the term is, but there's just something. Most people, right? They grow up, they get married, they have 2 kids, and they work. And
they're ordinary. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not knocking that because that's my life and I dig it. It's an awesome life. But, to discover calculus or that just takes a different mind than most of us possess, So, I don't know what to make.
And if you think about Temple Grandin, who's a very famous autistic woman with a PhD who's designed over a third of the cattle runs for getting dipped before they go to the slaughterhouse, they get dipped into a pond, and I shouldn't be talking in great detail about it because I don't know enough about it, but she's designed these things where cattle used to have to be driven into them and they were scared. And and now they actually go very willingly into them. And it's a fascinating story, but she's autistic and she's profoundly autistic. The way she describes the way she sees things, she can see almost things in 3D. It's almost like video going through her head. And it's fascinating to read what she talks about because she's got clearly normal, above average intelligence and has done really, really impressive things for her career.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We need a certain set of people that just look at the world differently, and that's okay, but I guess there's just no definitive answer. And we've talked about the media angle before, so I don't think we have to dig into that. But I think the point there is that you had the media hyping a story for decades, right? There's this Wakefield guy, but they never said it, but the implication was, he's sort of oppressed by the medical establishment, or at least the reporters would they would let that on, and they would sort of leave it to the reader to develop that in their minds. It was really disingenuous. It really drives me nuts. But
he patented 3 vaccines to replace the MMR.
Right.
He thought he was going to make a whole lot of money suing pharmaceutical companies. That's what came out in the investigation. So he had a completely ulterior motive, and all of his the story was completely fabricated. That the article that he wrote was fraudulent, and because of that, children have died because they have not gotten the MMR. So I have no use for that.
Yeah,
it's completely.
Yeah, he's an awful human being. This is just not a pleasant person to, put people in harm's way like that.
Yep.
So there you go. No answer. Aren't you glad you listened to science podcasts? The search continues. So speaking of things that we don't have conclusive answers on, Liza, I think this is sort of a pet issue for you because you know quite a bit about it. So this next one about psychedelics, this is a story by Mark Satter writing for Roll Call. It's called "Psychedelics Could Help Veterans with PTSD, Anxiety, Depression, Breakthroughs and Dropping of Taboos, Opening New Treatment Possibilities." So the gist here is that these drugs, psychedelics, magic mushrooms, MDMA, this whole class of drugs, if you can put them all in the same class, I'm not sure. Maybe you can clarify, Liza. Okay. They're still illegal here. They're obviously widely available. So you have military veterans and other people that have experienced real severe trauma are turning to these drugs, and they're reporting apparently very positive results. So their depression goes into remission, or their PTSD, I don't know if clears up is the right way to put that, but life becomes manageable when they have access to these. And the story goes on to say that there's this bipartisan push in Congress. You have AOC, who's probably as progressive as it gets in terms of Congress people. And then you have Dan Crenshaw, who is just a meat and potatoes kind of God and
military
kind of conservative. Yeah, so it's a pretty fascinating situation in that you have people that don't see eye to eye on anything, most likely.
That's right.
But on this, they're going, maybe there's some benefit here. And I'll turn it over to you. I don't have much to say except if it works, then what the hell, right?
Yeah, I think it'd be really, really important for the treatment of these really intractable disorders is a lot of times. So MDMA, ecstasy, Molly, is it actually has a really long name. It's 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine, and it had a little bit of a heyday in the late 70s or early 80s when psychiatrists started using it for depression. And it modulates serotonin levels in the brain, right? So what it does is kind of like an SSRI. It's a little bit different because it's got some amphetamine hooked in there. When you have high serotonin levels in your brain, that's associated with better mood or higher. And so what it does is it gets into the nerves in the brain that release serotonin. And it makes the neurotransmitter is carried in little packets at the ends of the nerves. And it makes those packets leaky, and then it starts pumping that extra serotonin out of the brain or out of the neuron. So it's now floating around in brain tissue having its effects. So that's how it works. And so some people call it an entheogen, finding the God from within, or an empathogen because it makes you more empathetic to people and things like that. And so anyway, they were using it and they were finding that was beneficial in patients with depression and things like that in the clinical setting. But it started getting diverted and made its way to the rave scene. And people were using it a lot. It was popular on college campuses at raves. It was popular in different communities at parties and things like that. And but it came to a screeching halt in 2002. And the reason why is it was an article that was published in Science that had come out of Johns Hopkins had discovered in monkeys, if you had given them one tablet of ecstasy, I guess how did it go? They had given a tablet of, I guess monkeys had gotten a total of 4 to 8 tablets over a certain time period. And they sacrificed half the monkeys and looked at their brains. And lo and behold, there was massive neurodegeneration of the serotonergic and dopaminergic cells in the brain. And so there was this panicked report that went out saying one pill can do this because they were very small doses. One pill can really cause massive neurodegeneration. And they sacrificed another set of monkeys several years later, and it's still persisted, and they were very concerned about this. So mass panic, lots of ecstasy had been scheduled before, but it was but now there was public panic over it. The psychiatrists that had used it in the clinical setting said, whoa, wait a minute. If you have massive neurodegeneration in your brain because of this exposure, you should have some phenotype, some physical characteristic that demonstrates that. You should have muscle wasting. You should have abnormal behavior. And we've given this medication to multiple patients, and they don't fall apart. If you get Alzheimer's, you forget stuff. If you got holes in your brain, you're not gonna function normally, right? And they said this doesn't make any clinical sense. So the researchers went back and they looked at the actual drug that they had given the monkeys and had to retract the paper because it was methamphetamine, not MDMA. And that actually makes sense. If you think about it, crosses the blood-brain barrier, very better than amphetamine. And if you think about chronic methamphetamine users, they have jaw clenching, they get wasting of their muscles, they get tweaking, Have you heard that term, where they have psychomotor confused agitation? A couple years ago, a guy who took, what are the court guys that take mug shots, put up a thing on a website called Faces of Meth, and you saw how people's features completely changed over a 2-year period from the multiple times that they got arrested. It's a really interesting thing to look at. So there are actual neurologic features that you can see with chronic meth use. And it's fascinating that that's what the confusion was. So that's MDMA.
So how did that happen? I'm just like any researcher, I hope if you get money to study this, you can tell the difference between MDMA and methamphetamine, right? Because
well, yeah, you should. But if you've got, solution in a bottle and says methamphetamine and then MDMA, and MDMA has methamphetamine maybe at the end of it, right? This is maybe, a lab tech mixed them up. Maybe, who knows? But they used the wrong compound. And so, but it should tell you that maybe meth itself is actually way worse, right?
Right.
So back to this is that if it's really helping people with refractory depression, I think it's worth looking at. I think it's worth looking at because refractory depression or PTSD is debilitating, and I think that maybe now there are some side effects. You got to be careful. If you're buying it at a rave, you don't know what you're getting, and there's some very toxic analogs that are on the market that cause people to seize and have heat stroke, essentially, like paramethoxyamphetamine is often sold as, or PMA is often sold as MDMA or ecstasy. And so you don't know what you're picking up from strangers when you're buying stuff like that.
I see. So those stories of people overheating at raves, that's probably what happens is they get a bad drug.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And MDMA, though, can make you have seizures also because people are drinking lots of water, right, at these raves, and they are not replacing salt. And then if you've got, it can cause a serotonin-like effect. So you can get too much, you can dilute your blood too much, and you wind up getting seizures because of water intoxication.
Really?
Yeah. So So people are more prone to that. And there are a whole variety of things. You can get serotonin syndrome if you mix it with other things that cause high levels of serotonin. That you can die from that. But if you're using it in a way, if you're using it in a dose that might have a therapeutic effect, I mean, we put kids on amphetamine all the time for ADHD, right? So, and if you have too much amphetamine, you can get sick too. So, once again, the dose is a poison, and PTSD is debilitating. And so, I think that there's enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that it's worth looking at. And that's that. Now, for the other stuff, like LSD, and I think we talked about this, maybe magic mushrooms. Have we talked about this in a previous podcast? Yeah, with the Albert Hoffman discovering LSD. And people going down to, what they mentioned in this article is people going down to South America because LSD is still Schedule 1, so they couldn't get that, or they have a hard time getting magic mushrooms. Tryptamines they're tryptamines, and they look like serotonin. And once again, serotonin is your happy neurotransmitter. And so when people take these, they have an elevation of mood, just like serotonin. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are agonists, so you get more serotonin floating around in the brain, and people tend to have better mood. Ayahuasca, which is what's mentioned in this article, is found in South America, and it's used in shamanistic rituals a lot. And it's for the indigenous people who are using it in a way to sort of communicate with the other world, or beyond their own imaginations, right? And what's interesting about it's a vine that is boiled with a different plant that has the leaves of a different plant, and it's boiled, and the vine actually has a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in it, or a couple of them, harmine and harmaline. And MAOIs actually are old antidepressants that we used to use. And they are one of the very first antidepressants that they used, that people were used. And so they prevent the breakdown of neurotransmitters. And so you get more serotonin floating around, you're in better mood. They also, the leaves have the more psychedelic effect. So a psychedelic is different than like ecstasy, because a psychedelic you hallucinate with. Ecstasy, you have like maybe an otherworldly experience, but you're not actually hallucinating. And so they have dimethyltryptamine in there. So DMT is what makes people hallucinate. They'll go down there and they will, it gets across the gut and into the blood-brain barrier because of this MAOI that they have. So people spend 2 or 3 days vomiting because it has effects on the gut, and tripping. And they come back and they report that they have an incredible change in perspective, and they feel better in terms of their mental health. And sometimes it just takes one time to do this, and they really turn around their depression. So it's kind of fascinating. But once again, you have to be very careful about, mixing other drugs. You don't want to get serotonin syndrome. You don't want to get, which is like heat stroke. And so you don't necessarily want somebody who's got a psychotic disorder having this either. So these haven't been tested extensively. I think there need to be very rigorous tests, and the horse may be getting out of the barn before we have definitive information. My caution on this is I think that we've gotten very lax about the side effects of different drugs. And it's caused harm. I think that we've seen that with the opioid crisis, which is now fentanyl, largely. And I think some of our harm reduction techniques have actually led to more harm. I think we're seeing some of the consequences, unintended consequences of widespread marijuana use that actually are not helpful. And I think romanticizing this, we should be cautious about.
Yeah. It seems that probably one of the best ways to sort of mitigate that would just be, I don't know, does Congress have to deschedule it or tell the DEA to deschedule it or whatever?
Yeah, they'll have to go through. I don't know what Congress's role is in it. I think that Congress, obviously with Dan Crenshaw and AOC, the Congress actually passed an act about ecstasy. I want to say in 1986, making it a Schedule 1, so you couldn't use it. Right. But if you could get it to a Schedule 3 or Schedule 2, that means you can prescribe it. But you have, depending on the schedule, you have different circumstances under which you can prescribe it. Schedule 1, you can't prescribe. There's no medical use for it. So you'd have to bump it down to a different level.
Yeah. But if you want a giant bottle of vodka, that's just down at CVS.
That's exactly right.
So go knock yourself out. Yeah, I don't know. That's always the Achilles heel, because I'm definitely sympathetic to some of the arguments against harm reduction, which I think is a misnomer if there ever was one, right?
Yes.
By harm reduction, you mean, needles all over your kid's playground and drug dealers hanging out, then harm reduction.
Right. And that's the problem. I think that we've normalized that kind of stuff, and I think that causes problems. Yeah,
I'm just spitballing, but I think maybe that, like, the sort of drug warrior mentality really unleashed that side of drug advocacy. Like, people just went full bore. They're like, not only are drugs not bad, they're good. And people like, it's sort of like, I don't know. It seems like it created this whole counter culture.
Yes, exactly. And I think that we've got to have a balance. You got to have to understand, when you understand something biochemically and pharmaceutically. I think that there may be some benefit to exploring this, and we do this with all sorts of drugs, right? Not just therapeutic drugs, not just illegal drugs, but
yeah. And they're not. It's not like they're non-existent now. I was at my buddy's house earlier today, and he was showing me a YouTube video there's apparently there's artists now, like musicians or singers or whatever, but their thing is like, I do these drugs and then I film music videos of myself, prancing through a forest. It's like, so that people that want these get them, so maybe the sensible thing is, let's get smart people to study them and figure out,
right,
how to dose them and all that. So,
yeah.
Okay. Interesting stuff. I'm never, hopefully I never need it, but I don't.
Yeah, right.
These sound quite horrifying. I've heard these stories of people tripping and.
Yes.
Yeah, unpleasant. Anyways, whatever. Okay, alcoholism. So this is an interesting. This is a blog post actually from 23andMe. This spit in a tube, and then they tell you if you're from what part of Europe you're from or whatever. But they're talking. This study was originally published in 2018, and this is the blog post, and they've updated it to sort of make sure it's current in terms of what they understand about it, I think. But this was researchers from the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, and they've identified some genetic variants that seem to correlate with alcoholism. Mm-hmm. And apparently they're excited because this is a very robust data set because it comes from the UK Biobank, which is it's a giant database of medical and genetic information on people. So it's a lot more robust than, we recruited some people and they told us that they eat this many slices of bread and therefore, eating bread causes, your left foot to grow longer. Like it's much more of it's a much stronger correlation, which is cool. But the thing and by the way, the study's in the American Journal of Psychiatry. So it's a big journal as well. The thing, and they report this here, and maybe you can comment on this. The thing that's odd though, is that alcoholism correlates with psychiatric disorders. It correlates with obesity. And it correlates with, I want to say, I don't know if they mentioned here, but like trauma, so like experiences in life that you go, I need a break, like I need to escape from this, right? So people go, hey, Budweiser, right?
Right.
So I guess and again, you're the doctor, so jump in and explain this, but it seems to me that maybe have they really found something conclusive, or at least that points us in the right direction, or have they just said, we found people, they have genes and they have lots of problems, to like, tell us what's going on here.
Yeah. So I think that once again, correlation is not causation. I don't think and different people have different polymorphisms or different responses. Let's just say that they're biologically different than other people. And so they react to things differently, right? So let's just say people who have depression or schizophrenia or other disorders that are difficult for them may compensate with that by drinking more. So is this a real kind of association, a true association, or is it true and unrelated? Are they drinking in response to their stress in life, and are what you finding around what you purport to be a gene that confers a higher risk of alcoholism, really a gene that goes along with these other psychiatric disorders? So that's one thing. The other thing is that people have different responses to alcohol. Some people metabolize it less well, and so you'll see people who are missing or have a lower level of aldehyde dehydrogenase, which is a middle step of alcohol metabolism, will get flushed and will feel nauseous and will not like to drink. You see that Northern Europeans and Caucasians actually are much more prone to getting full-blown DTs when they're withdrawing from alcohol. So they'll have delirium tremens where they get the shakes and they can hallucinate, and they can actually wind up dying from alcohol withdrawal. You tend to see that in European populations, and they have polymorphisms around their, what they call a certain receptor in their brain called the NMDA receptor. And so and interestingly enough, that receptor is associated maybe with some schizophrenia as well. So it's hard to say from what I am seeing that there is that there is a causal relationship between this set of these genes that they've identified. But I do think that there are inheritance patterns of alcoholism, but I think they're going to be vague. I think they're going to be vague like autism is. I think you're not going to, until we get much more granular detail, which AI might be able to do, but until we get much granular detail, I think it's hard to say this is a cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe you addressed this and I just missed it, but so if you suck or if you're worse at metabolizing alcohol, you're more prone to abuse?
No, you're less prone.
Okay.
You're less prone because
okay.
You get a disulfiram effect. Disulfiram, alcoholics who take disulfiram can't break it down very well, and so they get an intermediate metabolite, acetaldehyde, and acetaldehyde, which we talked about a little bit. With a couple weeks ago. But if you can't break that down, you get nausea, you get flush, you feel really lousy, you get dizzy. And then, so in Asian populations, you tend to see that a little bit more. So that's obviously inherited. In European populations, you see more of the alcohol withdrawal, which you don't necessarily see in other populations. And so that's probably genetic too. So I think that there are definitely families that have histories of alcoholism in them and people who really have a hard time stopping drinking.
I got you.
So I think that there's probably a genetic component, but I don't think that we're detailed enough. I also am not sure I'm crazy about 23andMe having that granularity of detail and telling people that just because they've got, where do you take this? Is the World Health Organization going to tell you you can't drink alcohol because you've got these genetic features? I'm not sure I like that.
Right. Yeah. I'll be just fine. Thank you.
Right.
Over my dead body. These clowns in Who gonna tell? Yeah, psychopaths. What was I gonna say? Oh, just as a final thought here, I wonder if, as interesting as this is, and to a certain degree it is helpful, but it seems to me that issues like drug abuse go really deep, and they deal like they go into parts of people's lives that we really don't like to deal with.
Yes, like that's exactly right.
Like as a society, to tell some people, like, listen, you have a problem with moderation in all aspects of your life, and you need to work on that, right? That's becoming increasingly unpopular, and even it's seen as like hurtful, or it's judgmental to say, "How dare you tell me?" So I don't know. It almost seems like we're sort of wasting our time because we're like, oh, this gene correlates with this, and you can't metabolize this chemical, and blah, blah, blah. But when you get to the end of the road, it's like, well, do what you want, because like.
Do what you want, right? Do what you want. And yes, your life has a whole destructive trajectory, right? It impacts other people. So I do think that there is room for telling people to moderate their behavior. And I think it's important to be able to do that as a society, and watching society kind of fall apart because we're telling people that they can do whatever they want.
Right. Yeah. Not that I have all the answers, right? And I'm not.
No, neither do I. Yeah.
And I'm not, like I'm hardly a prohibitionist or whatever, right? There's room for enjoying things in life. Don't get me wrong, but
agreed.
I don't know. A balance was the point you made earlier. It just seems we're not very good at that. It's either like, the government tells you everything you can and can't do, or it's just a free for all. It's like, hey.
Or pain patients can't get opioids, and let's decriminalize heroin in Oregon, right? Yeah. But if you're a pain patient, oh my gosh. Or if you're a doctor who prescribes an opioid, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the hospital's out of fentanyl patches, but just go down the street, right? They got like the really good stuff.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So
the stuff you can get in a dose from an expert, nope. That's nope.
Nope.
But if you want like a phony pill for $20, go see Fred on the corner.
Have at it.
Okay. Don't do that, anyone.
No, this does not constitute medical advice. No.
And even if it were, that would be horrible advice.
That's horrible advice.
Don't take any drugs based on anything you see on the internet, okay? That's just good life advice. All right. We're done. We'll leave it there. Thank you all for joining us as always. Follow us on Twitter, X. I feel like it's just going to become Twitter X now. It's like, because no one wants to call
Twix.
There you go. No one wants to call it X. I don't. It just sounds kind of stupid.
No, it should be Twix.
Yeah, Twix, Twitter, X, whatever. That social media platform, we're on there. We have a good time. Come follow us. It's at Dr. Liza MD, at CamJ English. Genetic Literacy Project is at Genetic Literacy. Follow them, read their content because they put this whole thing on for us. Thank you so much. And with that, we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.